Kate Morrison pressed her back against the cold metal wall and listened to the sounds of battle echoing through the mining station. Her plasma rifle felt heavy in her hands, but she kept her grip steady. She had been a soldier for 8 years, and she knew fear when she felt it creeping up her spine. The attack had come without warning. One moment, the miners on Kepler 442b were going about their daily work, digging precious metals from the planet's crust. The next moment, alien ships were dropping from the sky like angry hornets, their weapons turning the peaceful colony into a war zone. Kate had been visiting the mining station to check on security when the raiders struck. She was supposed to be heading back to Earth in 2 days, but now she wondered if she would ever see home again. Through the small window in the storage room where she was hiding, Kate could see the alien attackers moving through the main corridor. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with bodies covered in what looked like natural armor. Their skin was dark green and shiny, like the shell of a beetle. Most frightening of all, they had 4 arms instead of 2, and each arm ended in claws that could tear through metal. Kate had heard stories about the Zephyrians from other colonies. They were raiders who traveled across the galaxy, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction behind. But she had never seen one up close until today. She heard footsteps coming closer to her hiding place. Kate held her breath and tightened, her finger on the trigger of her rifle. The door to the storage room slid open with a soft hiss. A Zephyrian warrior stepped inside, his 4 eyes scanning the room. Kate waited until he was fully inside before she fired. The plasma bolt hit him in the chest and he fell backward with a surprised grunt. But Kate's victory was short-lived. More Zephyrians appeared in the doorway, and their return fire forced her to dive behind a stack of supply crates. The metal containers provided some protection, but she knew they would not hold up for long against alien weapons. Kate tried to remember her training. Stay calm, find cover, pick your targets, conserve ammunition. She fired 3 more shots, hitting 2 more aliens but missing the 3rd. Her rifle's power gauge showed that she was running low on energy. The sound of human voices came from somewhere, deeper in the station. Kate realized that other colonists were still fighting. Maybe there was still hope. Maybe they could push back the attackers and save the colony. She decided to make a run for it. Kate sprinted from her hiding place, firing as she ran. She made it to the main corridor and turned toward the sound of the other defenders. Behind her, she could hear the Zephyrians giving chase. The main mining hall was a scene of chaos. About 30 human colonists and workers had barricaded themselves behind overturned tables and mining equipment. They were firing at a group of Zephyrian warriors who had taken positions near the main entrance. Kate dove behind the barricade and landed next to a man in a military uniform. She could see the captain's stripes on his sleeve. "Jake Reynolds," he said, offering his hand without taking his eyes off the enemy. "Marine Corps." "Kate Morrison, same," she replied, checking her rifle's power level. "How many of them are there?" "2, many," Jake answered. He fired a shot that sent sparks flying from a Zephyrian's armor. "They've got us pinned down good. Been trying to reach the communications center to call for help, but they're blocking every route." Kate looked around at the other defenders. Most of them were miners and technicians, not soldiers. They were brave, but they were not trained for this kind of fight. She could see the fear in their eyes, and she knew they were losing hope. A young woman with short brown hair was kneeling nearby, tending to a wounded colonist. She looked up at Kate with tired eyes. "I'm Lisa Grant," she said. "Station medic. We've got 12 wounded and 3 dead so far." Kate nodded grimly. The situation was getting worse by the minute. The Zephyrians had superior numbers, better weapons, and more experience in combat. The human defenders were running out of ammunition and options, but Kate was not ready to give up. She had sworn an oath to protect human colonies, and she meant to keep that oath even if it cost her life. "We need to split their attention," she told Jake. "If we can create a distraction, maybe some of us can reach the communications center." Jake looked skeptical. "That's a suicide mission. Those things will cut you down before you make it 10 feet. "Maybe," Kate said. "But if we just sit here, we're all going to die anyway." Before Jake could respond, the Zephyrian warriors launched a Coordinated attack. They advanced from 3 different directions, their weapons laying down a deadly crossfire that forced the humans to keep their heads down. Kate saw her chance. While the other defenders were pinned down by the frontal assault, she slipped away from the barricade and made her way toward a side corridor that led to the communications center. She had made it halfway when a Zephyrian warrior spotted her. He was bigger than the others, with more elaborate markings on his armor. Kate guessed he was some kind of leader or elite soldier. The alien raised his weapon, but Kate was faster. She fired first, her plasma bolt striking his shoulder and spinning him around. But the shot was not enough to put him down. He roared in anger and charged at her with his claws extended. Kate tried to dodge, but the corridor was too narrow. The Zephyrian's claws raked across her left arm, tearing through her uniform and leaving deep cuts in her flesh. She cried out, in pain, but managed to keep hold of her rifle. The alien warrior was preparing for another attack when Jake Reynolds appeared behind him. The Marine captain fired point-blank into the Zephyrian's back and the alien collapsed to the floor. "I told you it was a suicide mission," Jake said, helping Kate to her feet. "Thanks for the backup," Kate replied, ignoring the pain in her arm. "Now let's get to that communications center." They made it to the communications room, but their hopes were quickly crushed. The Zephyrians had destroyed all the equipment. Sparking wires and broken metal were all that remained of the colonies, linked to the outside world. "Well, that's that," Jake said with resignation. "No cavalry coming to save us." Kate slumped against the wall, feeling the weight of defeat settling on her shoulders. She had failed to save the colony, and now she was trapped with no way to call for help. The sound of weapons fire from the mining hall was getting weaker. Either the defenders were running out of ammunition or the Zephyrians were winning. Kate suspected it was both. She and Jake made their way back toward the main hall, but they were too late. The battle was over. The surviving colonists were on their knees with their hands behind their heads, surrounded by Zephyrian warriors. One of the aliens, wearing more elaborate armor than the others, was barking orders in his harsh language. Kate could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. The humans were now prisoners. Kate and Jake had no choice but to surrender. They dropped their weapons and joined the other captives. As the Zephyrians bound their hands with energy, restraints that glowed with a cold blue light, Kate wondered what would happen to them next. She did not have to wait long to find out. The Zephyrian leader spoke in broken but understandable English. "You fight well for weak creatures," he said, his 4 eyes studying the human prisoners. "You will make good entertainment in the arenas of Zephyr Prime." Kate felt her blood turn cold. She had heard stories about the Zephyrian gladiatorial games from intelligence reports. Prisoners were forced to fight to the death for the amusement of alien crowds. Very few ever survived more than 1 or 2 battles. As the Zephyrians marched, their prisoners toward the transport ships that had landed outside the mining station, Kate caught sight of the destruction they had left behind. The colony that had been home to over 200 people was now a smoking ruin. She made a silent promise to herself as they loaded her onto the alien ship. Somehow, some way, she would make the Zephyrians pay for what they had done. Even if it meant fighting their champions in their own arenas, she would find a way to strike back. The transport ship lifted off from the planet's surface, carrying Kate and the other human prisoners toward an uncertain fate among the stars. But Kate Morrison was not just any prisoner. She was a soldier, and soldiers never stopped fighting, no matter what the odds. The journey to Zephyr Prime took 3 long weeks. Kate spent most of that time in a cramped cell with barely enough room to stand up straight. The only light came from a small energy bar that glowed blue in the darkness. The air smelled like metal and something else she could not identify. Jake Reynolds was in the cell next to hers. They could talk through the thin wall that separated them, but they had to whisper so the guards would not hear. The Zephyrians did not like it when their prisoners talked too much. "Any idea what we're walking into?" Jake asked during one of their quiet conversations. Kate pressed her face close to the wall. "I've heard stories about their arena fights. Prisoners from different worlds fighting each other while crowds watch and bet on who will die first." "Sounds charming," Jake muttered. "How many humans have survived those fights?" Kate was quiet for a moment. She had read the intelligence reports, and the numbers were not good. Not many. Most species last longer than we do. We're smaller, weaker, and we don't have natural weapons like claws or poison. Great. So we're going to be the opening act before the real fighters show up. Through the small window in her cell, Kate could see stars rushing past as the ship traveled through space. Somewhere out there was Earth and the people she had sworn to protect. Now she was heading in the opposite direction, toward a world where she would probably die for the entertainment of aliens. But Kate was not ready to give up. She spent her time in the cell doing exercises to stay strong. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretches, anything she could do in the tiny space. She also listened carefully to the Zephyrian guards when they talked. Their language was harsh and full of clicking sounds, but she was starting to pick up a few words. When the ship finally reached Zephyr Prime, Kate got her first look at the alien homeworld through the transport's viewing ports. The planet was covered in huge cities with tall spires that reached toward the sky. Everything was built from the same dark metal, giving the world a cold and threatening appearance. The largest structure she could see was enormous, even from space. It looked like a giant bowl turned upside down, with thousands of lights twinkling around its rim. Kate realized it must be the main arena where the Gladiator fights took place. The ship landed in a busy spaceport filled with vessels from many different worlds. Kate saw ships that belonged to species she had never heard of before. Some looked like giant insects, others like floating crystals. The diversity reminded her that humans were just one small part of a much larger galaxy. Zephyrian guards herded the human prisoners off the ship and into waiting transport vehicles. Kate counted 23 humans in total, including herself and Jake. They were all that remained of the 200 people who had lived on the mining colony. The ride through the city was both fascinating and terrifying. The streets were filled with Zephyrians going about their daily business, but Kate also saw members of other alien species. Some walked freely, while others wore the same kind of energy restraints that bound the human prisoners. The transport stopped in front of a massive building that connected to the great arena. As they were marched inside, Kate saw that the walls were decorated with weapons and armor from many different worlds. Trophies taken from defeated gladiators, she realized. They were taken to a large holding area deep underground. The room was divided into sections by energy barriers, with each section holding prisoners from different species. Kate saw reptilian creatures with scales and sharp teeth, insect-like beings with multiple arms, and tall humanoids with skin that looked like living stone. A Zephyrian wearing more elaborate armor than the guard stepped forward to address the new arrivals. His English was better than most of his kind, though still heavily accented. "Welcome to the Crimson Pit," he said, his forearms spread wide in a gesture that might have been welcoming if not for the circumstances. "I am Trainer Velkoth. You are now gladiators in service to the Empire. You will fight, and you will entertain our people. If you fight well, you may live longer. If you fight poorly, you will die quickly." He walked along the line of human prisoners, studying each one with his compound eyes. When he reached Kate, he stopped and looked at her more carefully. "You are a soldier," he said. It was not a question. Kate met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." "Good. Soldiers understand discipline. You will need that here." He moved on to Jake. "You also have military bearing. What is your rank?" "Captain," Jake replied. Velkoth clicked his mandibles in what might have been approval. "Two soldiers. Perhaps some of you will survive longer than most humans do." The trainer continued his inspection, asking questions and making notes on a small device he carried. When he was finished, he addressed the group again. "You will be given basic training in gladiatorial combat. Learn quickly or die quickly. The choice is yours." The human prisoners were moved to their own section of the holding area. Their cells were small but clean, with basic beds and washing facilities. Each cell held 2 people, so Kate found herself sharing space with Lisa Grant, the medic from the mining station. "This is insane," Lisa said as she sat on her narrow bed. "How can they force people to fight for entertainment?" Kate was examining the energy barrier that sealed their cell. "Because they're stronger than we are, and they don't see us as equals. To them, we're just animals they can use for sport. There has to be a way out of this, some kind of escape plan. Kate shook her head. Look around, Lisa. We're underground, surrounded by guards, and we don't even know how to get off this planet. Our only chance is to play along until we find a better opportunity. The next morning, their training began. The human prisoners were taken to a large practice area where Zephyrian instructors taught them how to use gladiatorial weapons. The weapons were different from anything Kate had used before. They were energy swords that could cut through almost anything, shields that projected protective barriers, and whips that delivered electric shocks. Kate took to the training better than most of the other humans. Her military background helped her understand combat tactics and weapon handling. She learned quickly how to balance an energy sword and how to move with the bulky armor they were required to wear. Jake also did well in training, though his style was different from Kate's. Where she focused on speed and precision, he relied on strength and endurance. Together, they helped some of the other humans who were struggling with the new weapons and fighting techniques. Dr. Alex Carter, a scientist who had been working at the mining station's research lab, surprised everyone by showing real talent with the energy whip. Despite his scholarly appearance, he had quick reflexes and good hand-eye coordination. I used to fence in college, he explained when Kate asked about his unexpected skill. The principles are similar, just with more electricity involved. As the days passed, Kate learned more about how the gladiatorial system worked. Fighters were ranked based on their victories, with the best ones earning better food, better quarters, and more respect from the guards. At the top of the system was the champion of champions, a Zephyrian warrior who had never lost a fight. His name is Krexval, explained one of the reptilian prisoners during a brief conversation between training sessions. He has held the title for 7 years. No one has even come close to defeating him. Kate filed that information away. If she was going to be stuck in this system, she wanted to understand how it worked from top to bottom. The trainers organized practice fights between prisoners to evaluate their progress. Kate's first opponent was a Saurian warrior who stood 6 feet tall and had razor-sharp claws. The fight was supposed to be non-lethal, using weapons set to low power, but Kate could see the killing intent in her opponent's yellow eyes. The Saurian attacked with typical reptilian aggression, slashing and biting with no regard for defense. Kate used her smaller size to her advantage, staying out of reach of those deadly claws while landing quick strikes with her energy sword. After 5 minutes of careful fighting, she managed to get behind her opponent and place her blade at his throat. The watching trainers clicked their mandibles in approval. Kate had won her first gladiatorial combat, even if it was just practice. Word of her victory spread quickly through the holding areas. Other prisoners began to look at her with new respect, while some of the guards started taking bets on how long she would survive in a real fight. But Kate was thinking beyond just survival. As she lay on her narrow bed that night, listening to the sounds of the great arena above, she began to form a plan. It was dangerous, maybe impossible, but it was better than simply waiting to die. If the Zephyrians wanted entertainment, she would give them entertainment. She would fight their champions, climb their rankings, and show the galaxy that humans were not the weak creatures they believed us to be. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to make them pay for destroying her colony and enslaving her people. The next morning brought news that chilled every human in the holding area. Their first real fights had been scheduled. In 3 days, they would face opponents in the Crimson Pit while thousands of Zephyrians watched and cheered. Kate looked around at her fellow prisoners. Some were terrified. Others were resigned to their fate. But she saw something else in a few faces. She saw determination, anger, and the will to fight back. The day of Kate's first real fight arrived with the sound of drums echoing through the underground chambers. The rhythm was deep and threatening, meant to build excitement in the crowds above while striking fear into the hearts of the gladiators below. Kate sat on her narrow bed, checking her equipment one final time. The energy sword felt comfortable in her hand now, and the armor fit her body like a second skin. She had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment, studying her opponent and planning her strategy. Her first opponent was a Mantari warrior, one of the insect-like creatures she had seen in the holding areas. The Mantari stood 7 feet tall with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in multiple directions at once. Their natural weapons were sharp claws and the ability to spit a paralyzing poison. "Remember what we talked about," Jake said from the cell next to hers. "Stay mobile, keep your distance, and don't let it corner you." Kate nodded. They had spent hours discussing tactics for fighting different species. Each alien race had its own strengths and weaknesses, and humans had to be smart to overcome their natural disadvantages. Lisa Grant was also fighting today, matched against a young Saurian who was new to the arena. Alex Carter would face a crystalline, being called a Voxtar in the 3rd match of the day. The schedule was designed to see how well the humans could adapt to gladiatorial combat. Guards came to escort Kate to the preparation area. As she walked through the tunnels beneath the arena, she could hear the roar of the crowd above. Thousands of Zephyrians were gathering to watch the fights, placing bets and calling for blood. The preparation area was a large chamber where gladiators waited for their turn to fight. Kate saw warriors from many different worlds, some sitting quietly while others paced back and forth like caged animals. The air was thick with tension and the smell of fear. A Zephyrian official approached Kate, with a small device in his hand. "Fighter designation Kate," he said, reading from the screen. "First combat against Mantari warrior Zekris. Combat will continue until one fighter yields or dies. Do you understand?" "I understand," Kate replied, though her mouth felt dry. The official made a note on his device. "Betting odds are 15-1 against you surviving past the first minute. The crowd expects a quick death." Kate felt a flash of anger at his casual tone. To him, she was just another piece of entertainment, no different from the weapons and armor hanging on the walls. But that anger also gave her strength. She would show them all what a human could do. When her name was called, Kate walked through the tunnel that led to the arena floor. The tunnel was long and dark, designed to build suspense as the fighters approached the fighting area. At the end, bright sunlight blazed through an opening that looked like the mouth of a hungry beast. Kate stepped out into the crimson pit and was nearly overwhelmed by the noise. The arena was enormous, with seats rising up on all sides like the walls of a canyon. Every seat was filled with Zephyrians cheering and waving their forearms in excitement. The sound was like standing inside a thunderstorm. The arena floor was covered in red sand that had been stained by the blood of countless fighters. Scattered around the circular fighting area were obstacles and barriers that fighters could use for cover or tactical advantage. In the center was a raised platform where the most dramatic moments of each fight usually took place. Kate's opponent was already waiting for her. Zekris was a typical Mantari warrior, with green chitin covering his body and mandibles that clicked constantly as he sized up his human opponent. His 4 arms each held a different weapon: 2 curved blades, a net, and a 3-pronged spear. An announcer's voice boomed across the arena, speaking in the Zephyrian language. Kate could not understand most of the words, but she heard her name and caught phrases that probably described her as a weak human who would provide brief entertainment before dying. A horn sounded to signal the start of combat. Zekris immediately charged forward, his multiple arms creating a whirlwind of attacks that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Kate had expected this aggressive opening. She rolled to the side and came up running, using her speed to stay ahead of the insect warrior's weapons. The crowd seemed surprised that the human had survived the first few seconds. Kate could hear the change in their voices as she continued to dodge and weave around her opponent's attacks. She was not fighting back yet, just learning Zekris's patterns and waiting for the right moment. The Mantari warrior grew frustrated with Kate's defensive tactics. He spat a stream of paralyzing poison at her, but Kate had anticipated this attack. She ducked behind one of the arena's barriers, and the poison splashed harmlessly against the metal. Now Kate went on the offensive. She sprinted around the barrier and attacked Zekris from an unexpected angle. Her energy sword caught him across, the back of one knee slicing through his chitin armor and drawing first blood. The crowd roared its approval. Even though most of them were betting against her, they appreciated skillful fighting regardless of which species was doing it. Zekris spun around with surprising speed, and lashed out with his net. Kate barely avoided being entangled, but the close call reminded her that she could not afford to get overconfident. One mistake would be her last. The fight continued for another 10 minutes, with Kate using her mobility to stay ahead of her opponent, while landing quick strikes whenever she saw an opening. Gradually, she began to wear down the larger warrior. His movements became slower, and he started to favor his injured leg. The end came when Zekris attempted a desperate all-out attack, throwing himself forward with all 4 weapons extended. Kate had been waiting for exactly this kind of reckless move. She stepped aside at the last moment and brought her sword down in a precise strike that severed 2 of her opponent's arms. Zekris collapsed to the sand, green blood pooling around his wounded body. He looked up at Kate with compound eyes that showed both pain and respect. "I yield," he said in broken English. Kate lowered her sword and stepped back. The crowd was on its feet, cheering louder than they had at the beginning of the fight. She had not only survived, but had dominated a warrior who was supposed to kill her easily. As she walked back toward the tunnel, Kate heard the announcer updating the crowd on her victory. She caught enough words to understand that the betting odds on her survival had just improved dramatically. Back in the preparation area, other fighters looked at her with new respect. Word of her victory was already spreading through the Gladiator quarters. The small human had defeated a seasoned Mantari warrior in her first fight. Kate watched the remaining matches from a viewing area reserved for fighters. Lisa Grant fought bravely against her Saurian opponent but was defeated after a hard-fought battle. The medic was injured but not killed, which meant she would have another chance to fight later. Alex Carter surprised everyone by defeating his Voxtar opponent through clever tactics. The crystalline beings were strong but slow, and Alex used his energy whip to stay out of reach while gradually wearing down his enemy's defenses. Jake Reynolds was scheduled to fight the following day against a Garathian berserker. These were among the most dangerous opponents in the arena, known for their incredible strength and resistance to pain. That night, Kate lay on her bed thinking about her victory. She had proven that humans could compete in the gladiatorial games, but one fight did not make her a champion. She needed to keep winning, keep improving, and keep showing the galaxy that her species was not weak. Over the next few weeks, Kate fought 6 more times. She defeated a young Saurian warrior, an experienced Voxtar champion, and even a Zephyrian gladiator who had underestimated her speed and intelligence. Each victory moved her higher in the rankings and earned her better treatment from the guards. The crowds began to take notice of the small human fighter who kept winning against larger and stronger opponents. They started chanting her name during fights, and some even began betting on her to win. Kate had become something she never expected to be, a crowd favorite. Her success also attracted the attention of the arena's administrators. Better food appeared in her cell, along with improved armor and weapons. She was moved to quarters reserved for higher-ranking gladiators where she had more space and privacy, but with success came greater challenges. Kate's opponents became more skilled and more dangerous. She faced warriors who had been fighting in the arena for years, creatures with natural abilities that seemed impossible to overcome. Her closest call came against a Shadow's Tell assassin, a species known for their ability to become nearly invisible. Kate could barely see her opponent during the fight, relying on sound and instinct to avoid attacks she could not see coming. She won by using the arena's lighting system against her enemy, positioning herself so that the bright spotlights cast shadows that revealed the assassin's location. After that victory, Kate found herself ranked among the top 50 gladiators in the entire system. It was an achievement that no human had ever reached before, and it earned her an audience with the arena master himself. Zilkith was ancient even by Zephyrian standards, with scars covering his body from his own days as a fighter. He received Kate in his private chambers high above the arena floor, where the sounds of combat were distant and muffled. Kate stood in the center of the practice ring, sweat dripping from her face as she finished another training session. 6 months had passed since her meeting with Arena Master Zilketh, and she had won 8 of the 10 fights needed to challenge Krexval. Each victory had been harder than the last, but she was getting closer to her goal. Her training partner today was Ben Walsh, a Marine lieutenant who had been captured during a raid on a transport convoy 3 months ago. Ben was built like a mountain, with broad shoulders and hands that could crush metal. Despite his size, he was fast and smart, making him one of the few fighters who could keep up with Kate in practice. "Your footwork is getting better," Ben said as they took a break between rounds. "But you're still telegraphing your left-hand attacks. Krexval will notice that in the first 30 seconds. Kate nodded and wiped the sweat from her eyes. Ben had become her closest ally in the arena, and his input was valuable. He had studied every recording of Krexval's fights just as carefully as she had. "Show me again," Kate said, raising her practice sword. They resumed sparring, with Ben playing the role of the champion. He was not as large as Krexval, but he moved with the same kind of controlled power that made the Zephyrian so dangerous. Kate worked on disguising her attacks, making each strike look like it was coming from a different direction. Their training was interrupted by the arrival of trainer Velkoth. The Zephyrian instructor had been watching Kate's progress closely, and she could see approval in his compound eyes. "Your next opponent has been selected," Velkoth announced. "You will face Theranax the Destroyer in 3 days. He is ranked 4th in the arena." Kate felt her pulse quicken. Theranax was a legendary gladiator, a Garathian berserker who had won over 50 fights in his career. He was known for his incredible strength and his ability to absorb punishment that would kill most fighters. "If you defeat Theranax, you will have earned the right to challenge Krexval," Velkoth continued. "The Emperor himself will attend that fight." After the trainer left, Kate sat down heavily on a bench. She was so close to her goal that she could almost taste it, but the next 2 fights would be the hardest of her career. Ben sat down beside her. "Theranax is tough, but he's not unbeatable. I've seen him fight. He relies on brute force and intimidation. If you can stay calm and stick to your strategy, you can beat him." Kate appreciated his confidence, but she knew the reality of what she was facing. Theranax had killed more opponents than any gladiator except Krexval himself. He was a walking nightmare who enjoyed causing pain. That evening, Kate received an unexpected visitor. Lisa Grant appeared at her cell, carrying a small medical scanner and a worried expression. "I heard about your next fight," Lisa said as she activated the scanner. "I wanted to check your condition before you face Theranax." Kate submitted to the examination, though she felt fine. Lisa had become the unofficial medic for all the human gladiators, using her skills to keep them fighting fit. "You're in good physical shape," Lisa reported. "But I'm worried about the psychological pressure you're under. The whole human community is watching your progress. If you lose now—" "I won't lose," Kate said firmly. "I can't afford to lose." Lisa looked at her with concern. "Kate, you don't have to carry the weight of our entire species on your shoulders. You've already done more than anyone expected." Kate shook her head. "It's not enough. Every human in the galaxy is judged by what happens in that arena. If I fail, they'll see us as weak forever." The next 3 days passed quickly. Kate spent every waking hour preparing for her fight with Theranax. She watched recordings of his previous battles, studied his techniques, and planned countermeasures for his most dangerous attacks. Alex Carter helped with the analysis, using his scientific background to break down the biomechanics of Garathian physiology. "They're incredibly strong, but that strength comes at a cost," he explained. "Their muscle density makes them slower to recover between explosive movements. If you can force him to overextend himself repeatedly, you might be able to wear him down." Jake Reynolds provided tactical advice based on his military experience. "Berserkers like to intimidate their opponents before the real fighting starts. Don't let his size and reputation get inside your head. He's just another enemy, and every enemy has weaknesses." The night before the fight, Kate could not sleep. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had led her to this moment. The destroyed mining colony, the long journey to Zephyr Prime, the months of training and fighting. It all came down to tomorrow's battle. She thought about Earth, about the people she had sworn to protect. Most of them did not even know her name, but their future might depend on what happened in the arena tomorrow. If she could defeat Theranax and then challenge Krexval, she could change how the galaxy saw humanity. The morning of the fight arrived with the usual sound of drums. But this time, they seemed louder and more urgent. Word had spread throughout the arena that the human fighter was only one victory away from challenging the champion. The crowds were larger than usual, and the betting was intense. Kate went through her pre-fight routine mechanically. She checked her equipment, stretched her muscles, and reviewed her strategy one final time. Everything had to be perfect against an opponent like Theranax. In the preparation area, she found herself facing the Garathian destroyer for the first time. Theranax was even larger than she had expected, standing nearly 9 feet tall with muscles that bulged like boulders under his skin. His eyes were small and cruel, and when he smiled, she could see teeth that had been filed to sharp points. "Little human," he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone. "I have been waiting to face you. The crowds want to see if you bleed the same color as other species." Kate met his gaze without flinching. "You'll find out soon enough." Theranax laughed, a sound that made other gladiators in the area step back. "I have killed 47 opponents in this arena. You will be number 48. "We'll see about that," Kate replied calmly. When her name was announced, Kate walked through the tunnel toward the arena with steady steps. She could hear the crowd roaring even before she emerged into the sunlight. The noise was overwhelming, like standing next to a waterfall. The arena was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled and people were standing in the aisles. Kate could see Zephyrian nobility in the premium sections, their elaborate clothing, marking their high status. In the Imperial box, she caught a glimpse of Emperor Zarketh himself, the ruler of the entire Zephyrian Empire. Theranax entered from the opposite side of the arena, and the crowd's volume doubled. He was clearly a fan favorite, with many spectators wearing clothing that displayed his symbol, a broken skull crossed by 2 axes. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, introducing both fighters and building excitement for what everyone expected to be a spectacular battle. Kate heard her own fighting record recited, along with the odds against her survival. As they took their positions in the center of the arena, the Ronax began his intimidation display. He roared challenges at the crowd, flexed his massive muscles, and brandished his weapons, a pair of energy axes that crackled with deadly power. Kate ignored the show and focused on her opponent's movements. She was looking for tells, small habits that might give away his intentions during the fight. She noticed that he favored his right side when turning, and that he had a slight limp in his left leg that suggested an old injury. The horn sounded to begin combat, and Theranax immediately charged forward with his axes raised. His strategy was simple: use his size and strength to overwhelm his opponent before they could develop any momentum. But Kate was ready for this. She had expected the aggressive opening and had planned her response accordingly. Instead of retreating, she ran straight toward the charging berserker, then dropped into a slide that took her under his swinging axes. Her energy sword caught Theranax across the back of his ankle as she slid past. It was not a deep cut, but it was in exactly the spot where Alex had predicted the Garathian would be most vulnerable. Theranax stumbled and spun around with a roar of pain and anger. The crowd gasped in surprise. No one had expected the human to draw first blood so quickly. The fight that followed was brutal and exhausting. Theranax attacked with the fury of a natural disaster, his axes carving chunks out of the arena barriers when Kate dodged away from his strikes. But Kate stuck to her strategy, using her speed to stay mobile while targeting the weak points that Alex had identified. Gradually, the accumulated damage began to slow the Garathian down. His movements became less precise, his breathing grew, labored, and his roars of challenge turned into gasps of effort. The end came after 20 minutes of intense combat. Theranax attempted one final desperate attack, bringing both axes down in a strike that would have split Kate in half. But she was no longer where he expected her to be. She had rolled to the side and come up behind him, her sword positioned at the base of his skull. "Yield," she said quietly. Theranax looked over his shoulder at the small human who had defeated him. For a moment, his cruel eyes showed something that might have been respect. "I yield," he said in a voice barely loud, enough to hear. The week passed like a dream that Kate could not wake up from. Every day brought new preparations for the most important fight in gladiatorial history. The entire Zephyrian Empire was talking about the championship match, and visitors from dozens of worlds were arriving to witness the spectacle. Kate spent most of her time studying recordings of Krexval's fights. She watched every battle he had ever fought, looking for patterns and weaknesses. The champion was impressive in every way, fast despite his size, strong beyond measure, and skilled with every weapon in the gladiatorial arsenal. But Kate noticed something that gave her hope. Krexval always fought the same way. He relied on his natural advantages and his reputation to intimidate opponents. He had never faced someone who refused to be intimidated. Alex Carter helped with the analysis, breaking down the champion's fighting style into measurable components. "He's incredibly skilled, but he's also predictable," Alex observed. "He uses the same combinations of attacks in the same situations. If you can recognize the patterns, you might be able to counter them." Ben Walsh focused on physical preparation, pushing Kate through training sessions that would have broken most fighters. "Krexval has never fought anyone who could match his endurance," Ben explained during one brutal workout. "If you can keep the fight going long enough, his age might start to work against him." Jake Reynolds provided tactical advice based on his military experience. "Every warrior has habits that become weaknesses over time. Krexval has been winning so easily for so long that he might have gotten careless about protecting himself." On the night before the championship fight, Kate sat alone in her cell trying to quiet her mind. Tomorrow she would face the greatest gladiator in the galaxy, a warrior who had never lost a single fight in 7 years of competition. Lisa Grant visited her that evening, carrying a small device that she used to check Kate's vital signs. "Your stress levels are actually lower than I expected," Lisa reported with surprise. "Most fighters can't sleep at all before a championship match." Kate managed a small smile. "I've done everything I can to prepare. Worrying about it now won't help." Lisa sat down on the edge of the bed. "Kate, I want you to know that no matter what happens tomorrow, you've already changed everything for our people. Humans across the galaxy are watching you with pride." "That's what scares me," Kate admitted. "If I lose, it won't just be my failure. It will prove to everyone that humans really are weak." "And if you win?" Kate looked out through the small window at the stars beyond Zephyr Prime. "If I win, we become equals. No more slavery, no more being seen as inferior. We take our place among the warrior races of the galaxy." The morning of the championship fight arrived with ceremony unlike anything Kate had ever seen. The drums that usually announced gladiatorial combat were joined by horns, bells, and instruments from dozens of different worlds. The sound echoed through the underground chambers like the voice of the gods themselves. Kate went through her preparation routine one final time, but everything felt different today. Her armor was polished to a mirror shine, her weapons were perfectly balanced, and her body was as ready as it would ever be. In the preparation area, she found herself face to face with Krexval for the first time. The champion was even more impressive in person than he had appeared in the recordings. He stood 9 feet tall, with muscles that looked like they had been carved from living stone. His forearms moved with fluid grace despite their enormous size. "So you are the human who thinks she can defeat me," Krexval said in perfect English. His voice was deep and controlled, showing no trace of anger or excitement. Kate met his gaze steadily. "I don't think I can defeat you. I know I can." Krexval's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your confidence is admirable. I will try to make your death quick as a reward for entertaining my people. The only one dying today is you," Kate replied calmly. For the first time in years, something flickered in Krexval's compound eyes. It might have been surprise, or perhaps the first hint of doubt. When Kate's name was announced, she walked through the tunnel toward the arena knowing that this was the most important moment of her life. The roar of the crowd was so loud that she could feel it in her bones. Over 2 million Zephyrians had packed into the Crimson Pit, and billions more were watching the broadcast across the galaxy. The arena had been decorated for the championship match. Banners representing every world in the Zephyrian Empire hung from the upper levels, and the sand had been raked into perfect patterns. In the Imperial box, Emperor Zarketh sat on his throne, flanked by the most powerful nobles in the Empire. Kate took her position in the center of the arena and looked around at the massive crowd. She could see humans in some sections, prisoners, who had been allowed to watch their champion fight for the future of their species. Their faces showed hope, fear, and desperate belief that somehow she could accomplish the impossible. Krexval entered from the opposite side of the arena, and the crowd's response was deafening. He was their greatest hero, their undefeated champion, the warrior who had proven Zephyrian superiority for 7 years. He carried his signature weapon, the Soul Render, an ancient plasma blade that had been passed down through generations of champions. The announcer's voice somehow managed to cut through the noise, introducing both fighters and building the excitement to fever pitch. Kate heard her own record recited, 37 victories in 9 months of fighting. It was impressive, but it paled next to Krexval's achievements. As they faced each other in the center of the arena, Krexval began his traditional pre-fight ritual. He raised the Soul Render above his head and roared a challenge that had intimidated countless opponents. The crowd responded with chants of his name that shook the very foundations of the arena. Kate ignored the display and focused on her opponent. She was looking for the subtle tells that Alex had taught her to recognize, the small movements that might give away his intentions. The horn sounded to begin the championship match, and Krexval advanced with measured steps. Unlike previous opponents who had charged wildly, the champion approached with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Kate circled to her left, keeping her distance while she studied his movements. Krexval was not trying to end the fight quickly. He was savoring the moment, playing to the crowd while gradually closing the distance between them. The first exchange came when Krexval suddenly exploded forward with a combination attack that had killed dozens of previous opponents. The Soul Render moved in a blur of deadly precision, carving the air where Kate's head had been a split second before. But Kate was no longer where Krexval expected her to be. She had recognized the attack pattern from her studies and was already moving to counter it. Her plasma sword scored a shallow cut across his left forearm before she danced away from his return strike. The crowd gasped. It was the first time anyone had drawn blood from Krexval in over 3 years of fighting. The champion looked down at the thin line of green blood on his arm with genuine surprise. Then he looked at Kate with new interest. "Impressive," he said, simply. "You may last longer than I expected." The real fight began then. Krexval attacked with all the skill and power that had made him legendary. His forearms worked in perfect coordination, creating attack patterns that seemed impossible to defend against. But Kate had spent months preparing for exactly this situation. She used every advantage she could find. Her smaller size let her slip through openings that would not exist against a human opponent. Her speed allowed her to stay ahead of attacks that would have destroyed anyone else. Most importantly, her intelligence let her recognize and counter patterns that Krexval had used successfully for years. The fight raged across the entire arena floor. They battled on the raised platform in the center, around the barriers at the edges, and through obstacles that had been placed to make the combat more interesting. With each exchange, Kate learned more about her opponent's style and limitations. 20 minutes into the fight, Kate began to notice that Krexval was breathing harder than when they had started. His movements were still precise, but they lacked some of the explosive power she had seen at the beginning. Ben had been right about the champion's endurance being his potential weakness. Kate pressed her advantage, forcing Krexval to work harder to defend himself. She varied her attack patterns, constantly, never letting him settle into a comfortable rhythm. Gradually, she began to see small openings in his defense that had not been there before. The turning point came when Krexval attempted his most devastating attack, the World Breaker Strike. It was an overhead blow that had never failed to kill. His opponent delivered with enough force to shatter reinforced armor. But Kate had studied this attack more than any other. She knew exactly when it was coming, and she had planned her response down to the smallest detail. Instead of dodging away as every previous opponent had done, Kate stepped forward into the attack. She moved inside Krexaval's reach where the massive Soulrender could not build momentum. Her plasma sword found the gap between his chest plates and drove deep, piercing one of his primary hearts. Krexval stumbled backward, shock and pain written across his features. Green blood flowed from the wound, staining the red sand beneath their feet.